In the digital age, when polarized opinions and anxiety have become commonplace, a legitimate question arises. What really defines human nature? Are we looking for answers in this chaos, or, on the contrary, are we getting even more lost? We suggest diving into the world of a genius who, long before the current era, was able to see the deep contradictions of human existence. But what is hell? I claim that it is suffering from the impossibility of loving more, wrote Dostoevsky, not just an author, but also a witness to the most cruel and truthful sides of human nature. The writer's life, full of traumas, tragedies, and deep reflections, became a kind of laboratory where he conducted experiments, extracting each epiphany that was later reflected in his works. Imagine a young idealist engrossed in a debate about the future of society. And suddenly, in 1849, he is arrested, sentenced to death, and led to the scaffold. That's exactly what happened to Dostoevsky. He had already been blindfolded and was waiting for the fatal volley when the news came that the execution had been replaced by exile. What happened next? What impact did this tragic experience have on his work and worldview? The answers to these questions you will find below. This narrative goes far beyond the usual tale of survival. It is a profound exploration of the metamorphosis of human consciousness after a near-death experience. After his experience, the protagonist spent many years in harsh Siberian prisons, where his cellmates were thieves, murderers, and social outcasts. It was in these grim circumstances that Dostoevsky plunged into the abyss of human suffering, transforming himself from a naive political idealist into an outstanding chronicler of mental experiences. In his Notes from the Dead House, the writer presents the reader with the grievous spectacle of dehumanization, while at the same time offering heartfelt reflections on the preservation of human dignity even in the most inhuman conditions. Each ordeal experienced in Siberia became for him a practical lesson in psychology and philosophy. He witnessed what happens to a man when he is stripped of everything human, reduced to a primitive state, and how, in spite of this, even in pitch-black darkness, one can find a spark of light. It is this duality that gives his works an all-encompassing character. After all, who among us has not faced the personal abyss of despair? Who in moments of crisis has not wondered about the existence of something more than mere suffering? Dostoevsky convinces us that not only is there something beyond suffering, but that suffering itself is an integral part of the process of self-discovery. He does not idealize pain, but sees it as a powerful force that, while destructive, has the potential for profound transformation. The Russian literary man deeply recognized the power of forgiveness, interpreting it as more than a simple or superficial act. He understood that true forgiveness involves an agonizing confrontation with personal weaknesses and a sincere effort to see the other person in their entirety without overlooking their shortcomings. A vivid example of this is the novel Crime and Punishment, where Rodion Raskolnikov, the protagonist, not only seeks redemption for the murder he committed, but also struggles with the heavy burden of his own moral arrogance. Dostoevsky poses a question that makes the reader wonder, do we have the right to judge others, considering ourselves better than them? The writer's experience of clinical death certainly influenced his perception of life, presenting it as a much more multifaceted phenomenon than simple and hasty conclusions. He realized with remarkable clarity that life is not a battlefield between good and evil, but rather a complex labyrinth full of choices and regrets. However, Dostoevsky's uniqueness as a writer lies in his ability to convey what can be called the struggle of the soul. He does not simply observe a person from the outside, but penetrates into his inner world, exposing dilemmas that we prefer to ignore and bringing to light the darkest thoughts that we hide even from ourselves. In a letter to his brother, written shortly after his return from exile, he candidly confessed, "My soul has been wounded and tested by the hammer of suffering, but I believe it has brought me closer to God." At the same time, God in his works is not always a religious image, but rather a symbol of truth in the relentless search for the meaning of life. The great Dostoevsky, like a seer, points out the danger of losing the inner search, of becoming faded shadows of ourselves, doomed to a superficial existence devoid of depth and meaning. And here the genius of the writer strikes a precise blow to the very heart of modern reality. In a world where entertainment is valued above introspection, where fleeting pleasures have replaced deep reflection, his words sound like a chime, like a stern warning. He challenges us to think seriously about our own lives, about who we are and how we use the priceless gift of existence. Just as Dostoevsky himself, on the brink of death, was forced to rethink his life, he calls us to a similar rebirth. We do not have to wait for a death threat to change, but we must have the courage to look deep inside ourselves and face our inner demons. This is a painful process that requires tremendous effort, but as the writer's life and work shows, it is absolutely necessary for a full life. The novel Crime and Punishment convincingly proves that man is a bottomless well of contradictions and ambiguities. Raskolnikov, the main character, is obsessed with the idea that he is above the moral laws governing society. He is sure of his superiority, that his intelligence and sense of justice allow him to transcend the boundaries of good and evil. But herein lies the cruel irony that Dostoevsky reveals with astonishing skill. Even in his attempts to break free from the shackles of morality, man inevitably returns to the voice of conscience, that inexorable judge living in the depths of his being. The author plunges the reader into the abyss of psychological torment of a man who has committed a grave crime against the foundations of society, presenting his attempts at self-justification. Everyone has probably encountered a situation in which he sought to rationalize a wrong deed, convincing himself of its necessity. Dostoevsky portrays Raskolnikov not just as a murderer, but as a reflection of human nature, where the protagonist is both victim and executioner, crushed by the grandeur of his own ideas and the realization of his own insignificance. It is as if the writer reminds the reader of his own susceptibility to such temptations. Indeed, who hasn't at least secretly longed to step outside the rules, to prove their exceptionalism and find justification for their mistakes by presenting them as a necessary evil? In the age of social media, where morality is often reduced to snap judgments and polarized opinions, Raskolnikov's dilemma takes on a special urgency. Dostoevsky, with his prophetic vision, seems to have foreseen the coming of the age of relativism, when everyone creates his own truth, forgetting the possible consequences. It should be understood that Crime and Punishment is not only a story about murder and guilt, but a profound study of the human essence in its entirety, with all the flaws, contradictions, and complexities that shape the personality. Rodion Raskolnikov's confession is not just a formal atonement for guilt, but rather a dramatic clash of inner contradictions. It is a desperate attempt to find a balance between the desire for independence and the urgent need to get rid of the oppressive burden tormenting his soul. It is an epic battle to return to something more than just a personal self. Dostoevsky rightly argued that conscience is the most ruthless tyrant, and it is hard to disagree. Who among us has not encountered intrusive thoughts that we have tried in vain to suppress? How many sleepless nights have been spent thinking about decisions that seemed right at the time of making, but later turned out to be exorbitant cost? Raskolnikov's mind appears as a fierce battlefield, and this internal struggle resonates in every person. Reading his story, one can't help but wonder, would we have had the strength to bear such a burden of guilt, or would it have crushed us? This question goes beyond the literary context and makes us think about our own actions and their consequences. In the digital age, where every action leaves its mark, where every click becomes a kind of stamp, do we fully realize the consequences of our actions? Are we aware of what happens when we impulsively share information, when we ostracize someone without thinking about the consequences, or when we hide behind anonymous avatars to say things we would never dare to say to their face? Are we truly free from guilt? Or are we, like Raskolnikov, trapped in a thin web of self-justification, desperately trying to convince ourselves that we are right? Fyodor Dostoevsky, a writer of unrivaled talent, seems to loudly proclaim that freedom of choice is a gift with both light and dark sides. On the one hand, it provides a unique opportunity to independently build a path of life. But on the other hand, it imposes heavy responsibility for each decision made. It is impossible to escape from this duality, just as it is impossible to avoid the consequences of one's own actions, like Rodion Raskolnikov, the hero of the novel Crime and Punishment. It is this ability to feel guilt, anguish of conscience, hope, and the constant tension between deep desires and values that serve as a reference point that makes people human. It is the eternal struggle that defines the essence of human existence. If in the novel Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky plunges the reader into the moral abyss of an individual, in the work Bessie he expands the boundaries of this chaos to the scale of the entire society, presenting the soul of a society on the verge of disintegration. The center of attention is not a fractured consciousness, but a social structure corroded by radical ideologies, fanaticism, and the lack of values necessary for harmonious coexistence of people. Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky, like a seer, analyzed the spiritual metamorphosis of his time with remarkable insight. In his novel The Imp, he brilliantly predicted the threats that arise when society, blinded by the thirst for unlimited freedom, breaks with its spiritual foundations. This work is nothing less than a warning of the dangers of nihilism, of the devastating emptiness that reigns when we, striving for new ideals, ruthlessly destroy everything in our path, not realizing that in this mad race we may lose the most valuable things. The characters in Foresaw are the quintessence of a world gripped by the fever of change. Peter Stepanovich, with his devilish dodging and the art of manipulation, appears to us as an image of a blind fanatic, ready to sacrifice everything for the triumph of his beliefs. He is a true conductor of chaos, a mysterious catalyst who turns doubt and general discontent into a blind, destructive force of violence. Nikolai Stavrogin, perhaps one of the most mysterious and contradictory characters in all of world literature, is the embodiment of the inner disintegration of a personality that has completely lost touch with any moral guidelines and higher principles. His all-consuming apathy and unbridled hedonism are not just quirks of character, but ominous symptoms of existential illness, which finds a deep resonance in our difficult times. In today's world, oversaturated with information and fleeting values, where individualism has reached its apogee, it is easy to see echoes of Stavrogin's image all around us, and, what is even more frightening, within ourselves. Fyodor Dostoevsky creates an oppressive but eerily true picture of a society torn by internal conflicts and contradictions. The writer demonstrates how the lack of a unified system of moral coordinates can lead to the deepest division, loss of mutual understanding, and, as a consequence, to collapse. If there is no God, then everything is allowed. This phrase of Ivan Karamazov from the novel The Brothers Karamazov, comprehensively explored in The Imp, sounds as a serious warning against permissiveness and relativism. When all truths collapse, a dangerous void is created in which any, even the most absurd and destructive idea, can capture minds. The most disturbing thing about The Imp is not only in the statement of the problem, but also in the fact that the novel forces the reader to face his own carelessness in the face of impending chaos. How often, covering themselves with high ideals, people close their eyes to the consequences of their actions? How many times in their pursuit of an imagined good have they ignored the suffering inflicted on others? Dostoevsky reminds us that ideas are never neutral. They carry weight, have consequences, and often require sacrifice. In today's world, where opinions spread instantly and people become hostage to ideological bubbles, the lesson taught by the best of me becomes especially relevant and inevitable. However, Dostoevsky does not simply record the blunders of his characters or the flaws of society. He points the way to salvation, although this path is thorny. In his opinion, healing comes not through social upheavals or idealistic utopias, but through a return to deep human values, mercy, self-sacrifice, and the ability to see meaning in suffering. It is no coincidence that even in the darkest moments of his works, there are rays of beauty and spiritual enlightenment. The writer believes that despite all our shortcomings, we retain the ability to transform, to reunite with something higher. This hope, however fragile, does not allow his novels to turn into hopeless pictures of despair. They become a mirror reflecting our reality and an incentive to change. This is why Bassi has such power. The novel not only shows us a world lying in ruins, but also calls for its restoration, starting with ourselves. This is not an easy task, but as Dostoevsky perfectly understood, nothing valuable in life is not given without labor. He poses a question to us: are we willing to face our inner demons in order to create something more true and lasting? Or will we continue to feed the chaos without seeing the consequences of our actions? This question, echoing in his work, remains as relevant today as it was in the 19th century. From the dark abyss of the nihilistic worldview presented in the novel The Bez, Fyodor Dostoevsky, in his magnum opus The Brothers Karamazov, guides the reader to the heart of the eternal questions that define human existence: faith, love, and suffering. In this work, the social and spiritual disintegration of society is reflected in the images of the Karamazov brothers, each of whom personifies the forces that shape and destroy the human psyche. Dmitri, a passionate hedonist, seeks solace from inner torment in worldly pleasures. Ivan, an intellectual and skeptic, embodies the dilemma of reason confronted with the unfathomable mystery of the divine. Alyosha, a young novice, strives for true spirituality, but is confronted with the brutal reality of the world around him. Together they form a triad, reflecting the eternal struggle between reason, feelings, and the desire for the highest, which defines human nature. Dostoevsky displays his genius by turning each dialogue into an arena of philosophical clashes, among which Ivan's monologue about the Grand Inquisitor is particularly notable. In this denunciation, he reveals the paradox of humanity striving for freedom, but deep down longing for guidance. People prefer peace and bread to freedom, Ivan asserts, offering one of the most penetrating reflections in literature. This critique is directed not only at religion and authoritarianism, but at the very essence of the human being, who, in the face of universal uncertainty and the weight of choice, often relinquishes his autonomy in exchange for the illusion of security. In today's world, where algorithms determine our preferences, where we give up personal data and desires in exchange for convenience, the relevance of this analysis becomes especially clear. Fyodor Dostoevsky goes beyond mere criticism. He delves into a deep exploration of the role of suffering in shaping the meaning of life. In his opinion, suffering is an integral part of human existence, but it is also necessary, like a purifying flame that transforms the soul and reveals the deepest truths. Through the character of Dmitri, who experiences moral and spiritual decline, Dostoevsky illustrates how pain can be a catalyst for change. Dmitri, initially immersed in the chaos of disordered desires, through his ordeal, gains a whole new perspective on life and himself. What is hell? Suffering from the impossibility of loving, writes Dostoevsky, implying that true redemption lies not in the avoidance of pain, but in the ability to love and find meaning even in the most dire circumstances. Perhaps the most important lesson of the brothers Karamazov, however, is taught by Alyosha. He is not an infallible saint, but appears to us as a young man full of doubts, whose kindness does not spare him from suffering. His spiritual search for God is complex and tortuous, reflecting the spiritual metamorphosis of many people in modern society, where faith is often mocked or reduced to meaningless dogma. Alyosha reminds us that spirituality is first and foremost a quest for connection with others, with the entire universe, and with ourselves. It is not the search for ready-made answers, but the asking of deep questions. It is the ability to love, even when everything around us seems to oppose this feeling. Like other works of Dostoevsky's pen, The Brothers Karamazov does not provide the reader with ready-made answers and simple paths. The author deliberately leaves open complex ethical and existential questions, encouraging deep introspection and rethinking of life values. In the face of suffering, everyone must make a choice: escape from pain or accept it as a stimulus for personal growth, to seek solace in established dogmas and social institutions, or to boldly follow one's own uncharted path. The greatness of this literary masterpiece lies in its ability to stir emotions, provoke thought, and raise uncomfortable questions. In a world torn by contradictions, are we able to find that golden mean where reason and faith, love and suffering can harmoniously coexist? Dostoevsky does not offer ready-made solutions. He only holds up a mirror to us, sometimes cruelly and unsightly reflecting our human nature. He forces us to face aspects of ourselves that we would prefer to hide, while giving us the hope of redemption, which is neither easy nor guaranteed, but is an attainable possibility. The main question that remains after reading the novel is this: are we ready to accept our inner complexity and, like Alyosha, find meaning in the chaos around us? Or will we continue to hide behind masks designed to escape the truth? While The Brothers Karamazov invites us to explore the depths of the human soul, Dostoevsky, throughout his oeuvre, creates a comprehensive reflection on the dilemmas that shape our existence. His works are not mere literary narratives, but true philosophical treatises, skillfully veiled as art stories, filled with profound symbolism and universal truths. Possessing an almost visionary gift, he seems to have realized that humanity by its very nature is doomed to a constant struggle between light and darkness, between the desire for higher things and the shackles of earthly existence. It is no wonder that his characters are constantly in a state of inner discord, balancing on the edge between virtue and vice. They are a reflection of ourselves, complex, contradictory, and infinitely human. Dostoevsky forces us to face what we try hardest to avoid: the fragmentation of our existence. In an age when the world tends towards simplistic solutions and absolute answers, he reminds us that life is, at its core, a territory of uncertainty. Through the lens of themes such as guilt, redemption, freedom, and morality, he delves into the questions that continue to haunt humanity. One must love life more than the meaning of life, he argues, hinting that the secret may not lie in complete understanding, but in embracing mystery and finding beauty even in chaos. This idea resonates particularly in these days, when the pursuit of happiness is often reduced to an algorithm, when we seek instant answers to questions that require deep thought. In his words, there is an insistent, almost instinctive need to warn us against the danger of losing our own humanity. In Notes from Underground, the narrator questions the belief that scientific and technological progress alone can save us. He emphasizes that human beings, even with all the rationality of the world, are still subject to irrational, often self-destructive impulses. This paradox, which Dostoevsky explores with consummate skill, is reflected in modern society, where enormous technological advances are juxtaposed with a sense of alienation and emptiness. We have never had such widespread access to information, but have we become wiser because of it? Has all this interconnectedness made us more connected to ourselves? Fyodor Dostoevsky has left an indelible mark on world literature, and perhaps his greatest gift to humanity is his reminder that suffering is not just an integral part of life, but an essential necessity. Far from idealizing pain, the writer presents it as a transformative force, a spark that ignites self-knowledge and spiritual growth. Looking into the images of such characters as Rodion Raskolnikov, Dmitry Karamazov, or Alyosha, we see people who, stumbling and falling, gain a new, deeper understanding of themselves and the world around them. This idea, which permeates Dostoevsky's entire oeuvre, comes into sharp conflict with modern culture, where momentary pleasures and instant gratification are prioritized, and any discomfort is perceived as something to be avoided at all costs. It challenges us to rethink habitual attitudes. What if suffering is not a dead end, but a road that leads to something more, to new horizons of self-knowledge and spiritual enlightenment? Dostoevsky's work is also a powerful reminder of love, but not of that superficial and conditional love that seeks profit and sets conditions, but of the love that sacrifices itself, that is able to see behind the external shortcomings of a person's true nature and accept him in his entirety. It is in the novel The Idiot that Dostoevsky most vividly embodies this idea through the image of Prince Myshkin, whose boundless kindness makes him both a redeeming figure and an object of ridicule. Prince Myshkin exemplifies that true strength lies not in the ability to suppress and dominate, but in vulnerability, in the willingness to love unconditionally, even in a world that often seems unable to reciprocate. Ultimately, Dostoevsky appears to us not only as a creator of reflection, but also as an opener of perspective. He exposes our vulnerabilities, our fears and inner conflicts, but at the same time offers hope for transformation, showing the human potential to find purpose and meaning even when darkness reigns. His work, which touches the deepest corners of the soul while reaching out to all of humanity, is a call to courage, mercy, and sincerity. The question arises, will you have the resolve to look into the mirror he offers? Or will you prefer to continue avoiding those issues that are of genuine importance? After all, it was not for nothing that Dostoevsky claimed that man is a riddle that needs solving. And so, is it worth delaying the start of this exciting journey of self-discovery?